And we are live.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Sam Tarakazian.
I'm Anais.
And I'm Maya. Gerald couldn't join us today because he's driving around Great Britain in a motorhome.
Not an RV.
Of course, not an RV. And we have a special guest today. Sam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, man, where to begin? It's been such a journey getting here. So I know Anais from way back. We went to high school together. We've been, I don't know, friends since then. I like to read a lot. Like, one or two books a week. I really enjoy mostly like kind of cerebral fiction. A lot of kind of Latin American authors, a lot of what do you call it? Like magical realism is definitely a big part of the fiction that I really enjoy. I don't write super much. The only outlet for fiction that I really have is like a bi-monthly erotic fiction reading group that I write for sometimes. But other than that, it's just reading. And I'm super excited to be here to talk about this this writing that you guys have brought for us this week.
Oh, yes. This story, Anais.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I didn't know that about the erotic fiction fan club.
Yeah, I should send you some.
I kind of find that really interesting that you write for an erotic fiction fan club, actually.
Well,
that's pretty cool.
The thing about writing erotic fiction is that, like, it's a really easy medium to subvert,
And it's a really easy medium to totally mess up.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. If you accept, as I have, that you're just never going to achieve real erotic satisfaction for anyone, it opens up this whole world where you can just kind of like...
I don't think that is the point of erotic fiction.
I checked. I'm pretty sure that's the point.
My first experience with erotic fiction was in middle school, seeing an MTV commercial that had a quote from Anais Nin's Delta of Venus in the commercial.
Whoa.
And I searched every library for like 2 years to figure out where that quote came from because I wanted that book.
Wow.
And when I found that book, I stole it from the library. I kept it.
Was it worth it?
Oh, yeah.
My
literary porn. My porn, was rated very high.
Wow. My friend Mira was telling me about how she used to find these like erotic romance novels because where they would always be is in the supermarket, like next to the candy. You're in the aisle.
Yeah,
and there's,
exactly.
Like, the candy for the kids.
Just the kid and the mom.
Exactly. And she always saw the covers where it's this really buff dude like on a mountain holding a sword, and she's like, that looks awesome. What a cool story that probably is. I want to be part of that.
My mom had stacks of the Harlequin romance books. It was no good really early, very high rating level right away. But Anais Nin, she got away with stuff that we couldn't write about now, for sure.
Really? I haven't read it.
Oh, yeah. You need to read some.
Oh, yeah. Well,
okay, now that we're all totally on a complete tangent and poor Anais is sitting there like, we are talking about erotic fiction. I guess we don't need the rating for the podcast this week. Let this be a hint to the viewers. You might want to check the ratings before you let your children listen to this podcast because sometimes we're very clean and sometimes we are not.
Like you said, depends on the story.
Yeah, or if you're already listening in, just explain to them. As they ask, Mom, Dad, what's erotic fiction? And you're like, well...
go to your room.
Yeah. Mom and Daddy love each other very much, but things have gone stale.
Mommy and Daddy love each other very much, but sometimes there's this pool boy. Okay. Let's get to the story, Anais.
To the story.
Give us a summary.
I'm very excited to discuss this week's story, which is What We're Made Of by Brandi Reissenweber. If you haven't read the story yet and don't want to be spoiled, pause the podcast, read the story, then come back. So, the story is told from the perspective of a group of stay-at-home suburban mothers and wives. They become fixated on the departure of the elementary school's office assistant, Carol Covington. The story begins on Carol's last day at school, minutes before the children are let out. Carol leaves, and by the cheap convertible she's driving and the bohemian clothes that she's wearing, we see that she's different from the business casual SUV driving women. And she isn't much younger than them, but her life is very different. It's marked by youthful, carefree fun. The mothers imagine her at the beach with friends at casinos, seducing younger men at pool bars. She wears lip gloss and gold ballerina flats, lives in a cool loft, jogs around the lake in short shorts. So the women become obsessed with discovering the motive behind Carol's departure. They invent reasons, such as Carol had an affair with the married principal or the shy librarian. They gossip and stalk the school grounds so effectively that the principal feels obligated to hold an open meeting to explain why Carol left, which the women regard as a victory. The only people who attend the meeting are, of course, these Carol-obsessed women. The principal explains, with a bit of finger-wagging, that the reason Carol left, which she wished not to disclose, is that she has to care for a sick family member. And some of the women still suspect it's an affair. But they content themselves with fantasizing about the downtrodden, aggrieved Carol caring for a sick relative. They imagine themselves holding successful fundraisers to pay for medical expenses, but never act upon that noble daydream. Instead, they carry on with their suburban routine.
So let's start with just initial impressions. How did you guys feel about the story? Who wants to take it?
I feel like Anais had a strong reaction to this story. Maybe you should unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of strange because as I was reading it, I had this kind of perverse glee, which I'll get into in a little bit. But as soon as I was done reading it and I took a step back, I'm like, I really don't like this, which is weird to go through a whole thing kind of feeling kind of like just mean and cruel. And then for reasons that aren't as direct as I think you guys are probably guessing at, and then walking away from it being like, no, it doesn't sit well with me.
I hated this story from the get-go. I was able to stay with it because there was some interesting literary stuff going on. But about halfway through, I actually found myself skipping ahead, trying to see how long it was. I read ahead to see if it got any better, and then had to go back and finish reading it. And it's not that the writing was bad. It really isn't. And it's not that these women weren't portrayed well, because I know these women, and I avoid them like the plague because I'm surrounded by them. And it's just this distaste immediately, and it wouldn't let up. And the way it was written didn't give me any room to breathe. You know how they talk about scenes and chapters, breathe and in and out? I didn't get any exhalation. It was just clogging me. How about you, Sam?
I mean, I didn't have the same strong. I absolutely resonate with, I think, what we're all picking up on, which is how unpalatable these characters are and how little we want to keep listening to their lives and how contemplate the minutiae they obsess over, just how like unsavory these people actually are. But I didn't feel compelled to stop at any point. I guess I kind of you say there were some interesting things happening. And also, I think it was interesting to try to figure out why these women were the way they were. You sort of get a glimpse in the, so there's the aspect of the story that is the fantasies that these women keep, this woman, and then there's also against that subtly their actual day-to-day routines, going shopping, doing their kids' homework, sitting around at home, and trying to kind of mine that for explanations about why they had turned out the way they are. Kind of kept me going through the story.
Yeah, I didn't get any of that, and I think partially because I live where I live. I am surrounded by these upper middle class stay-at-home moms that look down on me and are catty and talk about everybody because they have no lives, like for the last 10 years. And it's just so distasteful. I didn't find anything interesting. I really didn't find anything interesting about the women. And I think on one respect, using the point of view that she used, and we can talk about the point of view later, but using it the way that she did was a really good and interesting artistic choice. I just don't think it worked really, really well in order to keep me absorbed as a reader.
Yeah, I sort of have. I think it's interesting that Sam was saying that he liked how the story explored the way that they are. But the thing that actually left me with distaste is I felt that that exploration wasn't genuine, right? So I feel like the
Mm-hmm.
story is written by and for the Carol Covingtons of the world. And I think it's interesting to do the point of view collectively from the point of view of antagonists, right? They're definitely not the people you should be rooting for, these women, and we're seeing it from their point of view. And yet, despite this, they felt kind of like a mean-spirited caricature, especially when I took a step away from it. As I was reading it, I'm like, oh, I've been on the stabbing end of this gang of women. So for me, it's like cathartic. It's like, yes, let's laugh at them because they're horrible. But then, like, once the story's over, I'm like, they're still fully realized people. And by talking about them in the we and robbing them of individuality and sort of making them just this kind of grotesque cartoon, I felt like the story itself was mean-spirited, which is odd considering that that's the critique it's sort of making on these women. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where I ended up walking away from it a little like, I don't
See, for
know.
me, it wasn't so much that the was mean-spirited. I think what the we did was it made the story more about the group dynamic and group think of women when they're bored versus any particular woman individually. But I find it interesting that you felt that the story was written by and for the Covington women, type women, whereas this felt to me like the child of one of those other women trying to look back on that dynamic in, an interesting and artistic way. And it didn't ring entirely true to me. It really didn't. And I think that's part of what I found annoying about the story. And like you said, it didn't dive any further, but there were lots of places where it could have dived. If she wanted to keep the we dynamic, there are a lot of other places where she could have dove into really interesting places. And it was like it was glossed over and not really explored. How about you, Sam? You look like you've got something.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know exactly, because that's a really interesting and important point that, you know, I mean, the author clearly lost you by not being genuine, by not actually constructing real, I mean, you say realized characters, but apparently they're not believable. And if these women aren't believable, then the whole thing just becomes mean-spirited and spiteful rather than... See, I didn't have the same... or maybe just because I don't know these women, it was easier for me to accept that these were real people being portrayed, and a lot of the stories the specific details that are constructed around these women made them pretty believable for me. I forget her name, but the one woman who goes out to the bar and,
She attempts to try to put on
yeah,
the
to kind of
facade of the
live the
Covington. That
fantasy a
was
little bit.
interesting.
Yeah, and then calls her husband and is, like, nothing has happened, right? She played
She's
pool with the guy.
apologizing for not cheating.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. But of course, it's just, I mean, at the same time, it's just even living the fantasy for a few minutes is a betrayal to her husband and to herself, right? Like it really underscores how much she's dissatisfied with her own life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'm really curious to know what exactly rang false about the way these people were portrayed, and maybe how they could have been more realistically portrayed.
I don't think it's a matter of false or realistic, because I actually do think I've known, like I said, like Anais said, I know these women. I've seen these women. I was the young mom that everyone thought was too young because I was 20-something and not 30-something. And they can make your life a living hell. So the way these women have their group think and the way they live through their ability to, like, gossip, that was all ringing very true. And the idea of feeling sorry for someone and dreaming about helping them but never actually lifting a finger all rung very true. I don't think it's a matter of true or false. I think it's a matter of depth.
Yeah.
I felt like most of the story was very shallow as far as the depth of the character. And because it was written as a we, and we can talk about point of view next because it seems like this is a big part of the story. Instead of using having it in first person or having it in second person, he or she, the whole story is written as we, which actually made me feel so distant from the story. I needed the actual story itself to go deeper to counteract that. And instead, I had this distance throughout the entire story. Like, I was a voyeur to them being a voyeur. And that may have, in fact, been what the author was going for, but for me, it didn't work because it just left me feeling a huge distaste in my mouth. There were snippets, though, that felt like deep to me, and that point in the bar was definitely one of them, you know, and the instance where, and I don't know exactly, nothing was particularly said, but I could feel like the principal's like irritation with these women, and that felt really, really real to me, you know, and them sitting in the office and feeling important because they're called in when maybe they don't feel important at other times. That felt really real and really deep on a deeper level, but I felt like most of the story was written on a very shallow level to me.
Yeah, and the other issue that I had with the we is once you start writing it from the perspective of we, then everything that you write has to be something that someone in that group of women or the collective group would think. And I thought,
Anais, you froze, so go ahead and repeat that, and I'll cut that out.
Okay. The other issue with we is that as soon as you start writing it from we, everything that you write has to be, you know, as a reader, I expect it to be the thoughts that are happening, that are occurring to these women. And in some cases, the evidence of their like real life and how it is affected by their fantasy about Carol seemed a little ham-fisted. Like when they don't know the reasons why she's gone, and suddenly they're despondent about work, and then they get the open meeting to discuss why Carol left, and now they're enthusiastic again about doing homework with the kids and cooking dinner for the husband. Like there was some parts of this where I'm like, I don't actually believe that these women would reflect on these things in this way, right? Like there were some moments where I felt like if that's when I would feel most like it's a Carol Covington who wrote this, and it's kind of like a look how great I am for writing this from their perspective, look how open I am. But there was some, it felt a little petty in the way that in the way that it was like revealed how these women were behaving. But there was a few moments where it was done artfully, like when the same woman who calls the husband from the pool bar, so they're already hating on Carol's secretary, the replacement woman, the one who replaces Carol. And then I think her name was Lori, the one at the pool bar who had the breakdown. She shakes her hand, and then the collective we is like, yeah, we don't know if she did it out of civility or out of pity. That is something that I think if you had done it from an I would be so powerful. That complete lack of self-awareness, that you're like judging this woman for breaking the group think, is I think would have been benefited from an I instead of a we.
Yeah, I agree. There were definitely parts where the we was a little too self-reflective, and I think it would have been more honest to have seen the action, because people act without thinking all the time, and I think that would have rung more true rather than showing them reflecting, showing them acting in a way that doesn't necessarily correspond with how they're thinking about things. I think that would have definitely rung a little bit more true.
Maybe the whole reason behind denying anybody the I is about denying anyone in the story identity.
Yeah.
No one in the story gets to be a person except for Carol Covington. She's the only real human being in the story. There's her, and then there's this like groupthink blob. There's the principal, who's this like effete dude who hides behind the door and you know, is like our husbands but less attractive. Even our husbands are this abstract entity that I think that our husbands are the least realized. Even the kids in the story are more realized than the husbands, that are just kind of these machines that eat and
True,
work.
but can we talk about that line where she talks about the husbands that wear jeans to work? That was such a character vivid line. I love that line. I don't know if it was reacting to...
Is that the line about like meeting after school to do...
Let me look it up. It was a beautiful line. It was really vivid to me. Whoa. That was cute. It was this line describing the type of husband, and the line is the keep going, I'll find it.
Okay.
So while I was looking for that, I was going to say...
It was an amazing line.
What Sam was saying, actually, you're right that the husbands weren't fully realized, but I feel like the husbands were there subtly to like remind the reader you should be judging these women, because the husbands were always judging. They were eating, watching the news, or judging their wives.
Yeah.
Like that's all they were doing. And because they were watching the news, they were somehow better. Like that was like this implicit like subtext. Like they're the real adults. Like there was this meanness about the way that the women were portrayed, which is fine because they are I mean, I have notes which is just so vile after something would happen.
For me, though, that's all about like really bringing into the sharpest possible focus the literal hell that is these women's lives. There's no opportunity for self-expression. There's no opportunity to establish identity for them at all.
Right, you're right. The thing is, I guess what I'm saying is that it's sort of like you're bringing that. The way that I feel is we're bringing this to the story because we know this from our own experiences, but I don't see that in the story. Like the story, for me, is kind of just like, look how horrible they are, and they don't even realize it. They lack self-awareness, but there isn't a really in-depth exploration of how they got here.
But I got to bristle against the idea that literary fiction has to have the conversation within the fiction. I think it just has to prompt the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I guess for me though, the way that this one's being prompted, there's something about it that just feels like you're making a caricature out of a lot of women who are put in this position and behave this way, right or wrong, mostly wrong, but for good reasons. And it's I guess it bothers me a little bit that the story is sort of just like okay, being like laugh at them without really exploring anything else. Like, I feel like I'm being told to laugh, and I feel uncomfortable doing that.
Yeah, see, I didn't get the laughing response. I definitely got a feeling that the story was, showing me a phenomena that exists, and it accidentally turned me off. I didn't get the feeling that the author was laughing at these women. I think that's where the we comes in, because they don't have identity. That's why they have to pick apart somebody else, because they're borrowing identities of somebody else, because they don't have one of their own.
Yeah.
And so to me, that wasn't a laughing response or I hate these women response, although, these types of women just drive me up the frickin' wall. But I've always felt sympathy for them because I recognize that they're like this for a reason. They're supremely unhappy.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was just a completely different response that I had. And perhaps that's coloring the way that I see the story. I'm giving the author maybe more leeway for that, because I didn't have that response that you had.
Yeah, I feel like the circumstances of the group in the story are such that anytime that I was tempted to have this kind of judgmental, laughing response, it's met with this tone in the story that doesn't really allow any room for humor. For me, like, the tone was overwhelmingly really hopeless. And,
yeah.
The denying these people identity, not really resolving anything by the end of the story. Nothing really has changed for anyone, except there's been a subtraction of one fantasy that you can imagine as the reader will soon be replaced by another group fantasy. All that comes together to just really paint for me not a picture of a group of women, but really a picture of a town and a way of life, and these women as being just kind of one cog in this, meaningless suburban whatever, which is the real main character of the story for me, other than Carol.
Anais, that reaction you had that the author was trying to make you laugh at these women, can you point where in the story that really hit you the strongest?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much a laugh as like a derisive snort, like like I recognize this, I've seen this, and this is for example, when they were in the principal's office, there was quite a few moments of that, especially with the Kelly Sinclair character, who's the most vocal, and she's sort of like, I put her down as the Regina George. Like, she's loving everything that's happening with the principal. Right? Like, she's loving that they have all this power and this control, and it seems so petty. And when you read that, it's almost like you're supposed to snort at it. Or when they're fantasizing about doing a fundraiser for Carol's sick relative, but they never actually do it, right? I feel like that's another moment where you're supposed to, scoff at them.
But is it because of how it's written, or is it because of the context?
I think it's more that you recognize it, and the thing you recognize is something that you're not supposed to champion. I think that's where it comes from.
See, what I like about this story is it's critiquing a really ugly part of women's culture that I don't see brought up very often. it's like when we had that story with Jocelyn Johnson, and we were like, it's nice that the black woman isn't, perfect, and she has some anger. The author wasn't afraid to portray her as having normal amounts of anger, because supposedly every time you have a black woman, she can't be angry because you're a racist. I felt kind of that way about the portrayal of women picking down other women because they lack a sense of self. And I actually thought it was a refreshing topic. For me, what turned me off definitely was the way it was written, but I felt like the topic and the content was important and interesting, and could have been like an amazing story with like maybe a slightly different approach or maybe a few more edits or whatever. And so I'm that's interesting, because I didn't have that response, and I don't know if it's because I've been on the receiving end of those women and I live around them, like I never escaped them, or if it's just, a difference in how I read it.
Well, I would say that I agree that portraying the women in this way as imperfect and sometimes petty because of all this baggage that they're carrying with them is an important story to tell and to explore. I guess, just as I've said before, like, I don't think she actually explored it very sympathetically. And I think if she had used I, it would have been more sympathetic. If there would have been, because there's like one line where it's saying we were 16 years old and we thought about exploring polar ice caps or dancing in Vegas, or it was like a whole bunch of different sort of dreams, some of them scientific, some a little bit more like, feminine, to put it that way. But if she had picked one and you saw how this one sort of case study got to be here, I think it would have had a lot more depth to it and detail that would have made it real. Because this way it almost feels kind of like, it's kind of like, because you said you've been on the receiving end, I was on the receiving end of this too when I worked in an office. And I myself got to the point where I was like, yeah, but this woman has had it so much harder than me. I understand how she's got here. And knowing her individual story sort of made me sympathetic to the person who was like bullying me, right?
Yeah.
But there was this aspect that was like, knowing so well how she got there actually made her more sympathetic.
Yeah. One of the things I'm wondering, and again with the we thing, because you said if she'd used an I actually think if she would have used a she, it would have done similar. By using we, she includes the reader, and it kind of gave the same problem that you get when you have like a you story. There are very few stories written as you outside of like choose your own adventure stories, because it includes the reader, and if the reader can't identify with that group, it turns them off right away. And I feel like by including the we, that may actually be what is provoking your immediate snark response and my immediate just distaste in my mouth, because by including we, it's not a we that we can readily identify with, but it's a we that we have had experiences with, and therefore it can turn us off too quickly.
I have a theory that might, so my theory is that our different reaction here, your two reactions and my reaction, come from the fact that when I'm invited to be in this group with these women with the use of this first person plural subject, it's just like fantasy, and so when the author says we park in the parking lot, me as a reader, I'm like, sure, why not? I'll pretend to be a suburban woman. Why not? That'll be fun. That'll be like a fun day of playing dress up. There's no actual threat of my identity ever ending up like that. It's not possible. And so it's a really uninhibited fantasy for me to just be in this for a little while. Is it possible that, like, because
I think that you have more distance from the story, and that allows you to enjoy the story more.
It means I don't have this visceral response, this like immediate rejection of this lifestyle.
Yeah, because I remember like pulling up to drop my kids off for school and being surrounded by the Lexuses and all the various permutations of SUVs and Priuses, and I'm on my motorcycle with a kid on the back, and then I have to go get my second one. Or, living 4 blocks away from the school, and when the neighbor says, I want to drive your kids to school because it's cold, and I look at her and I say, that's what coats are for. they don't talk to me for 6 months because I'm a bad mom. And so when I have that experience, I'm not behind the wheel of one of those SUVs. I'm looking at them thinking, God, they're judging everybody all the time. And they'll look in your face and smile at you and then talk about you behind your back. And it's just horrible. And, you know, their kids are best friends, but kids blab. And so, you know, having your kids' friends say, oh, yeah, my mom said that you're going to hell because you're not Christian, you know, shit like that, you know. And so it definitely, like, when I look at this, I see these women, but I don't see any exploration beyond what is already obvious. I would have liked what Anais said, you know, to go in deeper, make them more real. Give me something that I can't readily see from the outside of the school, because I already see this.
Yeah, maybe a character, maybe, you know, using an I or a she, creating a single voice in this group would allow us to better see the tension between a person who wants to have their own identity and a person who also is part of this group. You know, you could have a woman who, a main character who, while she is really wrapped up in this Carol fantasy and is really participating in the lifestyle that all these other women are participating in, simultaneously has doubts, simultaneously doubts that what she's doing is right, and maybe feels a pull towards a different way of living and a different, maybe more honest identity.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say that, it reminds me that when I was reading the story and we got to who I'm just going to start calling Lori, the one in the pool bar, the meltdown one. Yeah. I wanted the story from her perspective. Like, I really wanted to see it just hers.
Yeah. I think this brings to mind a lecture I was just listening to, and I can't remember if it was, I don't remember who it was. It might have been a professor. He was talking about experimental fiction and how writers shouldn't be experimental writers. You write and you do experiments, but the nature of experiments is sometimes they fail. Sure. I feel like the choice to do this story with a we point of view was a really artistic and experimental choice and a really interesting choice, brave choice, but I feel like it didn't work, and it was a choice that added a lot of poetics and made it hard to let go of. There were a lot of points in the story where the we was used in a really melodical way that was very much, you know, borrowed from prose poetry. And I feel like, you know, this is one of those cut your darling type situations where it was an interesting experiment and it just didn't work. It could have been stronger from a different point of view.
Maybe there's a possibility, maybe this experiment points the way to a new experiment where the point of view shifts between a single character and the plural we.
Exactly. I feel like this was such an interesting experiment. I hate to say to the author, don't do it again. No, I want her to experiment more with it. I want her to find it for the story that it works with.
You know, I like to think that if you're an experimental author, you're comfortable and, in fact, see the virtue in a failure as something that gives you a lot of information. You know, there's a lot to learn from having written the story and having it be read.
Yeah, I would like to write a story in the we form. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out like what type of story that would work best for.
It's funny you mentioned the whole time we're talking about this point of view thing. I just finished If on a Winter's Day, or If on a Winter's Night rather, the Italo Calvino story, and not to make up a tangent, but it was really interesting. The whole book is second person singular. It's a you story, and
there's so few of those. Interesting.
You know, it's crazy, and I think it's worth reading the first couple chapters because it's not only is it a you, but the you is also fleshed out to the point where it's very possible to be almost deliberately excluded. The you is a man. The you is told that you are attracted to this woman. Your lifestyle is fleshed out. It's really interesting. Like, it's usually the you is, and it happens
more
in this story.
Vague.
Exactly, deliberately vague, so that no matter who you are, you can insert yourself. Not really specific, so that it's almost impossible to fit yourself into that piece. And that's going on here too with the we, right? It's not a vague we that just kind of floats around and observes things. It's a very specific we that if you want to be that we, you have to be a certain person.
So does anyone have any special lines or parts of the story that really stood out that really made you go, whoa? I found that line that I was talking about. It's she's just describing. The line before says, we usually see her early morning directing crossing guards to their posts when we drop our children at choir practice. Then she says, or in the parking lot long after school lets out when we're on our way to a hushed meeting with a secret vice, unfiltered cigarettes, key lime pie, men who wear jeans to work. I love that line. It was so visual for me, and it just instantly put me in a place. It told me a lot about the type of men and just their boredom. You know, the best part of their day is getting some pie and some unfiltered cigarettes. Like, it was just like instant. I love that line. How about you guys?
That is a great line. A lot is said. It's super evocative. The imagery is great. Like you said, it's a lot being said with just a few words. I really love this line when they're at the. It's not for the writing, but just when they're in the meeting with the principal, and then the round woman cranes her neck in to say it's 11, and the next line, he's scheduled us very close to his next obligation. That detail that the principal hasn't even allowed a lot of time for this meeting. It's such a good moment of self-consciousness on the part of the group that they're like, you know, because it's this power trip to be in there and to be talking about like crushing the principal into his office, but then then this happens and they kind of realize, oh, this is for him like a just a 10-minute thing to get these women to stop writing the school. That was a good line.
Yeah, I was gonna quote that line, but I also have another one which I think struck a note with me because it's such a way that women could communicate. It felt very real, which is right at the beginning after Carol leaves and everyone has their children and they're going to go home, and it says, instead of a wave when we pass one another, meet each other's eyes and raise delicately arched eyebrows. Oh, I know that. That's the judgmental eyebrow arch eye contact thing that women do. I was just like, oh, these piranhas. Like, I immediately knew.
The piranhas have arrived.
But that's what that means. And you know, I remember in high school having a super close friend who Sam knows, Jessica Barron, who might be listening to this, and she and I would do that. We would do the look at each other, raise eyebrows, judgmental thing about something, and then it would just be like a mental note, and then later we would gossip about it. The difference is we were 14, 15, 16, not adults.
Girls learn it really early. As a mother of boy-girl twins, I can tell you that right around 3rd grade, the social relationships between girls are so fraught with emotion and drama compared to boys. At 3rd grade, my daughter was already experiencing the whole, if you're my friend, you can't be her friend. You know, and we were having to navigate this because 2 of her friends didn't want to be friends with each other. And just all this mess. And my son, I'd be like, so what's your friend's name? I don't know. How do you not know your friend's name? We just play. Like, that was the extent.
Man, oh man. To this day, that rings so true to me.
I don't know. We just play.
Oh. It really feels like, especially when it comes to things like, women who do things together around certain activities. Like, I feel like for men, the things that guys do together are always things that you can form friendships around. But a lot of times for women, I feel like if 2 women happen to be into something similar, say like, I don't know, making music, there's this, especially if it's in a field where women aren't usually the dominant gender. So to make it like more specific,
competitiveness gets in.
Yeah, competitiveness is really there. Like, there's not enough room for all these female voices. So, you know, which really
it's an interesting distinction, you know, and it's something that I'd always seen, but it wasn't until I had both a daughter and a son the same age, and I watched them on their trajectory, that all of a sudden, all of life's mysteries started to make sense. Like the whole, how come all these 16-year-old girls are getting their boyfriends in trouble because their boyfriends are 18? Because 16-year-old boys are the equivalent of like a 13-year-old boy in boy years. Yeah. Like, they don't want to date 16-year-old boys.
Understandably.
It's just, so much drama.
One thing that oh no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, to your comment about sort of competitiveness, especially in male-dominated fields, but I feel like that's something that a lot of women will actually grow out of, because I remember being a lot more competitive when I was younger, when I was a teenager, and then at some point during college, it kind of just disappeared or went away, or I got used to it.
I don't know. I've seen a lot of really competitive older women. Totally. When I worked in mortgage. When I worked in high-end car sales, I sold sports cars, and there were like 2 older women and they were not pleased that there was a younger woman coming in to sell cars. Same thing with mortgages. You know, we were working with jumbo loans, you know, $1 million, $2 million loans. They were not pleased with another woman in the office, and a lot of that was competitive.
Well, yeah, the same thing happened in my finance office. It was mostly women who worked there, of course, male bosses. And whenever there was a new woman who was hired, like this sort of like the mean girls would say something. But I guess the reason I'm making that distinction about sort of maturing out of it or not is when you're talking about your daughter sort of doing this at a young age, it's something we can all laugh about. But when you see it in older women, then it seems really petty and mean-spirited.
And sad.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we need to be careful not to extrapolate our maturity and amazingness onto like the bulk of humanity, because Anais, you're pretty special.
Well, I guess what I'm getting to.
What a lesson for our listeners.
Yeah, lesson for the listeners.
Remember, just because you're awesome doesn't mean the world isn't garbage.
Exactly.
You heard it here first.
But bringing it back to the story.
Yeah.
I guess then just, you know, that brings us back to the pettiness and demonstrating this. And I think also when Sam said that when he read it, the tone was very kind of sad and hopeless. Yeah. I wonder if a lot of that sadness has to be sort of like, you guys are still here in high school mentality. Like, I think that's kind of some of the sadness as well.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I also feel sad that these women aren't going to escape this. They're going to be in the exact same situation when in 20 years, when their kids are out in college, like women that are like this at, 40 don't really outgrow it until they're like 80.
There's nothing waiting for these women, though. Like we're talking about development that goes through college, and that's like possible because college is a time when there's still development. There's still things happening. There's life events that are going to happen to you, and those shape you as you get older. But these women, like it's just monotony. There's nothing that's going to be different in their lives from the moment the story ends through to the end. There's almost nothing that's going to happen to them.
Unless they get really lucky.
Yeah,
or have like a breakdown.
I have hope for Lori. But I was going to say, but just to be clear, it isn't that they stay at home or that they're suburban housewives. That's not what does it, because they're not the only mothers.
No, they were
at the
like
school.
this before this.
Yeah, because, there's other mothers at the school who do not go to this open meeting and are not obsessed.
They're not the women that sit in the front of the school and stare and gossip and think about other women. Like, it's not all women. It's very specific to this group of women.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it has to do with sort of just like stimulating the mind. Like, I wonder if some of the other moms who don't care just have like more fulfilling hobbies.
I think so.
What is it? What is it that makes that difference?
I think for me, what makes a difference when I read this story is sense of identity, and that's where the we was an interesting choice. That's why I feel really torn about this story, because, there were parts of it that were really interesting that made really good points. At the same time, it doesn't completely work for me. But I do think that that's where the we comes from, is the need to show that the lack of identity is what's making these women like this, or the lack of fulfillment is what making these women like this.
Something that I wanted to ask you guys was how you ultimately ended up feeling about the Carol Coventry character. Both in terms of her identity, who she is, and what your picture of her is like based on the story, but even more importantly, your attitude towards her. Is it sympathetic? Is it...
You know what? And this is probably going to be the most damning statement on the story for me. I had no feeling about her. I had no emotional response to her. She was just a woman, a normal woman. She quit her job.
Interesting.
We don't even know why she quit her job. He alluded to the fact that she's taking care of family. We don't know what it was. She could have gotten pregnant.
Right.
Out here, some of the private schools, they'll you get pregnant out of wedlock, you can quit or get fired.
Which do you think? What do you think is the most likely scenario for what happened to her, or do you just not care?
I honestly just don't really care, and I think that, like I said, that's the most damning part of the story for me, is the fact that I left not caring.
Yeah.
I do think that probably, my initial thought was she probably got pregnant.
Yeah.
so cynical.
I know, it's horrible, and I can be so cynical sometimes. It's really bad.
Cynical about the pregnancy, like it has to be like some kind of like scandalous type thing. But I agree that I also didn't care, and I don't care why she left. But I think the reason I don't care is similar to why I didn't care about the guy in the Yukon when we read To Build a Fire by Jack London. Because she wasn't a fully realized person either. We don't know anything about her. She's a foil. She's a foil for what is being said about the we, the collective we. So like
she's a foil for the woman of a certain age that is still, interesting and having fun and, still sees herself first as a woman, rather than first as a parent, second as a woman.
And for me, it's really not that damning. I guess I didn't need her to be fully developed because the story isn't about her. It's about the we and the women in that group. So even if I'm only seeing the parts of her relevant to bringing out the behavior in the women that we've been discussing, that's fine. Like I'm fine with her being a foil, but I don't care about her.
Interesting.
See, I felt like I should care about her, but I don't. And that to me is what made it really damning for me because I did feel like I was supposed to care about her. Just the way she was written about. I felt like I was supposed to have sympathy for this character, and I just wasn't feeling it.
I thought that it was hard not to think about her, speculate about her life, in the same way that, when you see a picture of a group of people and somebody's like photobombing it in the background, that's the actual point of interest in that picture. Who cares about these people in the foreground? It's the person in the background who's interesting. In the same way, having this whole story be kind of seeing this woman through a really tiny aperture brought her into really sharp focus for me, just in terms of where like the interest in the story really was.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting though, because I get what you're saying about the photobomb, but the stuff we're seeing in the portrait, a lot of it's made up. We don't know that she actually is sunbathing in the tropics.
But that's what's so interesting. It's like, so what is she doing?
I mean, she could literally just be at home with like 5 cats watching Netflix all day.
That's
everything that we read about her.
But that's what's so interesting, right? Like in all likelihood,
her cat got diabetes, so she quit her job so she could take care of her.
But that's what's so interesting is that all the things that we hear about her, like these women have one reading that is, it's her freewheeling, self-indulgent, independent lifestyle. There's another reading to a person who like drives a beat-up convertible and wears clothes that might be more fitting on someone 10 years younger, and it's someone who just has kind of failed to has this arrested development and hasn't been able to do a lot of the growing up that a person does as they get older. Right? There's a totally different reading that actually paints her as a really tragic and even sympathetic character, and like trying to see if that fit was an interesting thing for me in this story.
Yeah, I agree with the Arrested Development. It's funny, I don't really have an opinion on this, but as the story moved on, she got like sexier. Because when I first saw her, she kind of was like an older woman who refuses to like age the way society tells her she should age, and she's fine with like a butterfly clip and like an ill-fitting skirt and and that's fine, and she's just kind of having a good time and living her life her way, in a way that some people might find socially dysfunctional if they're inclined to judge.
Yeah.
But then like as time went on, like when they were first describing her running in short shorts with ankle weights, I mean, I pictured a woman with like quite a bit of cellulite and not overweight, but not super toned. And as the story kept going, she kept getting sexier, which was just odd.
Interesting. Were there any lines that brought her sexiness into focus, or just like in your head?
I don't know. I think it's sexiness. You know what? Maybe this is to the credit of the author. Maybe as the fantasies that the women had when we were removed from what they were seeing in the parking lot to the fantasy that they had about this woman, she became sexier because what she was doing became sexier. She's running off to the tropics in a bikini, not caring about kids. That's great.
Yeah. I really love how vivid the Carol Coventry fantasies are. Like that one where she is on the beach and, down to the color of her bikini, the fact that her novel is propped open in the sand. There's a martini or a pina colada or whatever, like within reach. It's so vivid. And like for me, that was actually a really strong point in terms of the writing. Is the author doesn't say, we sat on the couch for 4 hours and dreamed about Carol Coventry. The author just like gives you this fantasy that's so vivid that it clearly took like a whole day to come up with.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there were some really strong points in the story, and that was one of them. Yeah. You know, I had a smile on my face as I read it, you know. And
I mean, to be honest, that's a pretty. I would fantasize about being that person as well. That sounds like a pretty great lifestyle. Novel on the beach, bikini.
Yeah.
The way to be. 2
years, man. Mom party. Got one kid left. Send him to college. I'm out.
How did you guys choose the story? If that's an acceptable question to ask on
this was Anais' choice this week. What made you pick this one?
Yeah, so we sort of have like an unspoken rule where we don't really read the stories, even the person who chooses them, so it's a surprise for all of us. So I had no idea what I was getting into.
Yeah.
But we hadn't read from a not as well-known author in a while, so I was looking through authors that don't have massive bios on Wikipedia, and then came across Brandi Reissenweber, which is interesting because I think she teaches at an MFA. She's done quite a few things. She writes a lot for this literary journal called Willow Springs. So I was like, well, which one has she done that's free? So I just kind of found someone who seems to have their feet very wet in this world, but hasn't made it full-blown Wikipedia yet.
We all choose stories for very different reasons, you know. I do like it when we choose stories that none of us have read yet, but we definitely try to find like diverse fiction so that we're not reading all of one type of story all the time. Which is probably an excellent segue, Anais.
An excellent segue.
He just did our job for us. That was brilliant. And I ruined it by mentioning it.
Yeah. It was such a seamless transition until we went back and pointed out the transition.
Yeah. Well, we haven't done the Bradberries.
Yeah, we should probably rate it. Our rating scale is between 1 and 6 Bradberries.
Oh, my God. Why 6?
It just happened. It was supposed to be 5, and then somebody wanted to give it an extra, and it ended up being 6.
I have a reason why it's 6.
Why is it 6?
Well, because when I was doing that Ray Bradbury article, and Wikipedia has like over 600 short stories, and that list is incomplete, and there may be more. I was like,
so it's all like symbolic.
Yeah,
the 6
for every
is
100
symbolic.
stories we know Ray Bradbury has written.
Okay. Well, there you go. There's your reason for 6. I'm going to give it 3 Bradberries. And the only reason why I'm not giving it 2 is because there were a few moments where there was really, really strong symbolism, and I liked the brave choices that the author was making. Even if they didn't entirely work out the way she wanted, they gave me a perspective that I'm not used to reading, and I appreciate that.
I'm giving it as well 3. I'm kind of down the middle on it. There was a lot of things that felt a little mean-spirited about it. I wish there was more love for these women. I understand it's easy to not give them too much love. It's like my hippie side. But the imagery was great. It's good to pay more attention to this kind of behavior. We don't have these kinds of stories, so I enjoyed that. So 3.
I'm going to just blow all these ratings away and go totally off the charts. I'm going to give it 4 Bradberries.
Whole 4.
Yeah, a whole 4.
Off the charts.
Yeah, exactly.
We've never had a 4.
Yeah, well, you've got a 4 now. It's tempting for me to go down to 3 because I think you guys make a lot of really good points about sort of the shortcomings of this particular experiment in fiction writing. But if I'm being honest with myself, I really, in spite of the fact that the characters evoked a lot of disgust for me, the fact that the writing was able to evoke that disgust points maybe to how effective the writing was for me. So that combined with a lot of really good imagery and some just really smart choices in terms of what details to kind of highlight make me think that 4 Bradberries is appropriate.
Great. And
we have last week's Bradberries. What did the audience give for last week's story?
Yep, so last week we read Birdsong by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and listeners gave it 5 Bradberries.
Whoa.
It was very good.
Yeah, that was almost universally well loved.
Has there ever been any, why is there a 6? Who was the 6 that,
So far, we've only had 2 6s on the show. I
Well-
gave a 6 to Birdsong, and Gerald gave a 6 to... What story was that he gave a 6 to? It was a few weeks ago.
It was a few weeks ago.
Like,
Feel
even,
bad.
let me put it this way, I think Hemingway got like 4s. Jack London was getting like some 3s. I think I gave him a 5.
Wow.
I want to say it was a 6 for also a not so well-known author in Gerald's
Yeah,
case.
it was a really unknown author because I was like, ooh, that's really great that the first 6 is somebody that's not really famous. And I can't remember who it was now. That's really funny. Now we're all going to have to go look it up.
Now I'm like annoyed. Gerald should be the most annoyed.
There should be.
He's probably shouting it at his RV TV.
It was Constance's Law, Bridget Hardy.
Ah, yes, that's right. He did give it to her.
It was good. It was a very good.
Yeah,
one.
it was a very good story.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think this is the time
For the game.
So
Okay.
what we do for the game, Anais, you can probably intro this since my microphone keeps falling.
Okay, so Sam, what we do is you and Maya are going to play competitively to basically whatever story you put up to read next week. If you win this game that I am hosting, we read your story.
Whoa.
It's a very difficult game.
Okay.
And we're in it to win it.
Exactly. So the story that I am putting into the hat is The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe.
Tough to beat. The story that I'm putting into the hat, I guess, is Axolotl by Julio Cortázar.
Okay. And as some listeners may know, I love Ask Me Another, the puzzle game show from NPR. So I'm taking their format, this, that, or the other, but I made my own categories and words. So basically, I'm going to say something, and you need to tell me if it is a motorhome, in honor of Gerald, a town in Great Britain, also in honor of Gerald, or the nickname of a British football club. So, for example, if I said the Red Devils, you would know it's a football club because that's Manchester United. I know you both knew that.
Yeah.
No clue at all. Hey, I didn't even know that they had RVs in the UK. When Gerald told us he was in a motorhome, I was like, really? They have those out there?
So just to recap, it's model of motorhome. What in the UK?
A town. It could
Town
be
in the UK.
England, Scotland, or Wales. Mhm.
Okay. And the third one was a football team.
Nickname.
The nickname of a football. Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay, let's do this.
I'm ready.
I'm going to go Sam first.
Okay.
Sam, your
Yes.
word is
Uh-huh.
barn staple.
Barn stable?
Staple with a P.
Barn staple. Pfft, I'm going to guess it's not a football team because why you would call your football team the barn staple seems out of control. The barn staple could so easily be, it's just barn staple, not the barn staple.
Just barn staple.
And staple spelled the way I expect, like.
Yep.
Is there
What is this, like a spelling bee? Like,
This name means a lot to me.
Sam, you get one more question.
can I have the definition, please?
Phone a friend. Can you use it in
All
a
right.
sentence?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we were not supposed to try. I'm gonna go with a place, a city in the UK.
Yep, it is a town. Sam has 1 point. Okay.
Yeah.
Maya. Yeah. Maya, Blackwood.
Motorhome.
Nope, also a town. Psyching you out.
Oh, that totally sounded like the name of a motorhome.
I would have said motorhome.
Yeah.
I totally want to drive a Blackwood.
Okay. Sam,
Yes.
Wombles.
Wombles.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I wish that were an RV, but that really sounds like a football team to me. Wombles.
It is. Did you know that?
I mean, wouldn't you want to play for the
It
Wombles?
sounds like a football team.
The
It does.
Coventry Wombles?
It's the AFC Wimbledon. The Wombles.
Makes sense.
Maya, Cosalt.
What?
Like, or maybe it's Cosalt. It's spelled like cobalt, but with an S.
Town.
An RV.
Cosalt.
No. You need to make
I'm
a comeback
totally
to
just
Maya.
bombing here, aren't I? Oh man, I can't even get 1 point.
this, that, or the other. It's a very tough game. Sam.
Yeah.
Duns.
Duns? D-U-N-N-E-S, yeah?
D-U-N-S, one N.
D-U-N-S? I'm going to go with a football team again.
Nope. Town in Scotland.
It's okay. It's okay.
You got this. You've had like all these points. I don't even have 1 point yet.
I have like a point for each hand. I'm just rolling in points. There's so many points.
Okay, Maya. Chasan.
I didn't catch that.
Chasan. Or maybe Charleston or Chasan. I don't know.
Motorhome.
Yes, motorhome.
Thank goodness I got a point. I hate it when I don't get any points. Make me look good, man.
That's right. Okay, Sam.
Yes.
Addicts. Like, if addicts were spelled with a CK instead of a T. Addicts.
The addicts. It's plural, which makes me think it's not a motorhome. But Duns was a city. I'm going to go with football team once again.
Football team. Very good.
Yeah.
Charlton Athletic.
Sure.
I didn't even know that existed.
This is great because like after each answer, you know, we get a little piece of information from Anais that I will never remember or use ever again. It's great.
Exactly. It's wonderful.
I love learning nothing.
You have to find like a local like bar that has trivia night and it's like British football clubs. You're ready.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Maya. Holdsworth.
Town.
An RV.
No way.
Really?
I was gonna get so mad. I was like, that's so obviously a town.
Yeah. It is really a town name.
I feel like that must be an RV named after a town.
Yeah, totally.
Or somebody like the Holdsworth made it. I don't know. You know what? I don't have that piece of trivia.
Where's this information coming from? Will you cite your sources at the end of this quiz?
Yes.
I want a bibliography in the chat window. Get on that.
Okay.
How many more questions of you making me look bad do I have to live through now?
Well, if we go to 10, you could technically tie Sam. Or
okay, let's do this. Let's do this. Rock, paper, scissors, man.
Okay. Maya, Tykes.
Oh, really? Football.
Yes, it is football. Oh, Sam, were you saying that was yours?
Yeah, I get skipped, but that's cool. Just I'll.
You know what? It's better to skip.
Give him 2 questions then.
Suspense.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you fail and then you tie.
Exactly.
Then I'm gonna have to go find another one. Okay, Sam.
Yeah.
Grimsby.
Grimsby? It's got to be a town.
It is a town.
Nice.
Over.
Nice. Where is Grimsby?
In England somewhere.
In England somewhere. Wow. Shout out to the people of Dobesby.
That was really specific, Anais.
Yeah, right. We love Dobesby. Famous for being somewhere in the UK.
I didn't want to do too much research.
Visit them at somewhere. Somewhere is lovely this time of year.
I just wanted a quiz where Gerald could be with us in spirit, because I'm sure he's been to all these towns, because he does this every summer. So there is no stone left unturned.
I want to go on vacation with Gerald.
I know. You're not on Facebook, but he keeps uploading pictures of himself on Facebook, and it's like different towns and then pasta and wine. That's his thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
Listeners know.
He's having a total blast.
So Sam won with 4 points. Maya, 2.
Lost.
No, I don't want to say lost. This is the positive place.
You just didn't win as much.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
It's totally fine.
It's just like when like the new age parents like give all the kids medals, even the ones that lost, and it's like, yeah, you really sucked, but here's a medal anyway.
Hooray.
Here's your you sucked medal.
You know, I mean,
It's the you showed up medal.
it's just the guest's advantage. It's a it's a thing. It's a documented phenomenon.
Sure.
So Sam, once again, what was your story?
It was Axolotl by Julio Cortázar.
I'm excited to read it. You should join us in the comment section and tell us what you loved about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sam is the only one who should be joining us in the comment sections. If you had strong personal feelings about this week's story, like Maya and I, then share them with us at literaryroadhouse.com. While you're at it, leave an iTunes review and let us know what you think about the podcast. Your reviews help us make the podcast better for listeners like you. And as always, don't forget to tell your friends. And until next time, read a good story.